Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. Sometimes it feels like, workplaces can be like a powder keg, just
Yeah.
waiting for that one little spark.
Oh, yeah.
And that's exactly what's happening over in St. Johns County, Florida right now.
Oh,
The deputies there are voting on whether or not to form a union,
wow.
and the sheriff is not happy about it at all.
So this is a really interesting situation. It's like a case study
Yeah.
in labor relations, especially in law enforcement,
High stakes.
where the stakes are incredibly high.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so we've got this article that we're looking at today from Jacksonville Today,
Okay.
and it's titled, Police Union Accuses St. John's Sheriff of Anti-Union Activity.
Oh.
Pretty serious stuff.
Yeah, that sounds pretty serious. So let's break this down a little bit. What exactly is the Florida Fraternal Order of Police, the FOP, accusing the sheriff of doing?
So essentially, they're claiming that Sheriff Hardwick is trying to use his authority to sway the vote against the union.
Mm-hmm.
And they're saying that this could even be a violation of the National Labor Relations Board rules.
And remind us what the NLRB does.
The NLRB, they're a federal agency that's
Right.
supposed to make sure that union elections are fair.
Gotcha. So what did the sheriff actually do that's gotten the FOP so riled up?
So according to the article, as soon as the union vote was announced, Sheriff Hardwick, he scheduled these mandatory meetings for all the deputies
Okay.
with himself and the department's legal counsel.
I can definitely see why the FOP might see that as a little bit intimidating.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
What's the sheriff's side of the story?
Well, the article says that the St. Johns County Sheriff's Office declined to comment.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they're saying that they're following the advice of their legal counsel.
You know what they say? Silence speaks volumes.
It really does.
It sounds like maybe they know they're on a little bit of shaky legal ground here.
Uh-huh.
But you know what? Let's take a step back for a second. Before we get into all the legal stuff, tell me a little bit more about this FOP. What's their role in all of this?
So the FOP is a pretty major player in Florida law enforcement. They represent officers across like 100 different agencies.
Right.
And they provide legal support. They advocate for better working conditions.
Yeah.
And they'll even step in if they think that an officer has been wrongfully terminated.
So basically, they're like a union for police officers. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
And in this case, they're really pushing hard for a union to be formed in St. Johns County.
So what are they saying about, like, why they think the deputies need this union?
Well, their president, Sean Dunlap, is quoted in the article, and he says that the deputies need a seat at the table
Okay.
to be able to address concerns about safety, about job security, and financial well-being.
So it sounds like they're saying that the deputies feel like their voices aren't really being heard right now?
Yeah, that's their argument.
Yeah.
They're saying that Dunlap claims that deputies' concerns have been ignored for way too long,
Okay.
and that a union is the only way to force the sheriff to actually listen.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So it's like the FOP is painting this picture like it's David and Goliath, right? With the deputies being like the underdog.
Yeah.
But let's be real for a second. Police officers, they do hold quite a bit of authority.
Cool.
So why do they even feel like they need a union in the first place?
Right.
What are they hoping to gain?
Well, on the surface, I think their motivations are probably pretty similar to any other group of workers that are trying to get union representation. So things like, better pay, better working conditions,
Sure.
more of a voice in departmental decisions.
Right. Makes sense. But I feel like police work, is a very specific kind of job.
Yeah.
Are there things about it that would make union membership especially appealing?
Totally. I mean, police work is inherently dangerous.
Yeah,
It's stressful.
for sure.
So having a union, that can provide that legal protection if an officer is accused of any wrongdoing,
Okay.
they can negotiate hazard pay,
Makes sense.
push for better mental health resources, and they can also kind of act as a buffer against public scrutiny,
Oh, that's interesting.
which can be really intense these days.
Especially right now, yeah.
Exactly.
So yeah, I'm starting to see why some officers might feel like a union is necessary.
Uh-huh.
But, let's look at the other side of the coin for a second.
Okay.
What are some of the arguments against having police unions? Could there be any downsides?
That's a really important question.
Yeah.
And it's one that causes a lot of debate.
Uh-huh.
Some people argue that police unions can actually make it harder to discipline officers
Okay.
if they engage in misconduct.
How so?
Well, they say that unions are so focused on protecting their members
Yeah.
that even when those members have maybe acted inappropriately,
Yeah.
it can hinder accountability
Uh-huh.
and transparency.
But it's kind of like a shield that sometimes protects the wrong people.
That's one way to look at it, yeah.
Wow.
And another concern is the economic impact.
Okay.
So unions, they can negotiate for higher salaries and benefits,
Sure.
and that can lead to increased labor costs for taxpayers. So some people argue that, those costs outweigh any of the benefits
Yeah.
of having a unionized police force.
Makes sense.
And it puts a real strain on public funds.
So it sounds like this is a really complex issue with valid arguments on both sides.
Yeah, for sure.
But let's bring it back to this specific situation in St. Johns County.
Okay.
What could happen if these deputies actually vote to form this union?
Well, the stakes are high for sure.
Yeah.
If that union vote passes, it could really change the whole dynamic between the deputies and the sheriff's department.
How so?
Well, the sheriff would have to negotiate with the union on all sorts of issues, like
What?
pay and benefits,
Yeah.
disciplinary procedures, all that stuff.
Wow. Yeah. So that could create some tension
Oh, definitely.
and make it harder for the sheriff to manage the department.
For sure.
And this sets a precedent too, right?
Absolutely.
Other sheriff's departments in Florida are going to be watching this.
100%. The outcome of this could have ripple effects
No.
throughout the whole state.
Wow.
It could inspire other law enforcement agencies to unionize, and that would lead to increased costs
Okay.
and challenges for local governments.
Yeah, they'd have to deal with all these newly empowered unions.
Exactly.
All right, so just to recap here, we've got the FOP accusing the sheriff of trying to influence this union vote.
Yep.
The sheriff isn't saying anything based on the advice of his lawyer,
Uh-huh.
and the deputies are potentially about to gain a lot more power.
Right.
Is there anything else we should touch on before we move on?
I think it's really important to remember the bigger picture here.
Okay.
The FOP keeps saying that the deputies deserve a seat at the table,
Yeah,
and that might resonate with some people.
sure.
But it's important to think about the potential downsides of
Okay.
having a union, especially in law enforcement.
So you're talking about like less accountability,
Uh,
higher costs for taxpayers?
exactly. While unions can be a good thing in some industries, there are some serious concerns about how powerful unions
Yeah.
could affect government agencies,
Gotcha.
especially those that are responsible for public safety.
So are you saying that police unions are automatically a bad thing?
I wouldn't go that far. It's not that simple.
Okay.
But I do think we need to be critical
Mm-hmm.
and look at both the good and the bad
Yeah.
when it comes to unions in law enforcement and how they affect the communities they serve.
So what does all this mean for St. Johns County and for law enforcement in general?
Right.
What are the potential consequences of this vote? That's the big question, isn't it?
It is.
This whole thing really shows just how complicated the relationship is
Yeah.
between law enforcement and organized labor.
Uh-huh.
So let's say this union vote passes.
Okay.
What kind of ripple effects could we see in St. Johns County?
Well, think about it. If those contract negotiations totally fall apart,
Oh.
you could have work stoppages, strikes,
Wow.
maybe even a slowdown in law enforcement activity. It could really put a strain on public safety and make people feel anxious.
And what about the financial side of things?
Right.
You mentioned that earlier.
Yeah.
Could this lead to higher taxes?
It's definitely possible.
Wow.
If they need to cover those increased salaries and benefits.
For the deputies.
Right.
Yeah.
And then that raises another question.
What's that?
Where does all that money come from?
Yeah, good point.
It could mean cuts to other important services,
Like that.
like education.
Okay,
Infrastructure.
straight for the police union?
Yeah, so it's not just about deputies getting a seat at the table.
Right.
It's about potentially disrupting
Yeah.
the entire county's budget.
And how it operates.
Exactly.
And then there's the whole issue of accountability.
Uh,
What if it becomes harder
yeah.
to discipline officers because of these union protections
Right. Could that lead to less public trust?
in law enforcement?
Exactly. That's a slippery slope.
This deep dive has been really eye-opening.
I agree.
I'm seeing this whole police unionization thing in a new light now.
It's complicated.
It really is.
Yeah.
Before we wrap up, is there anything else our listeners should keep in mind?
I think it's important to look past all the talk
Okay.
and really think about the potential consequences.
For everyone.
For everyone involved, the deputies, the sheriff's department,
Yeah.
and especially the community.
Makes sense. It's all about finding that balance, isn't it?
It is.
Between protecting workers' rights and making
Mhm.
sure we have public safety
Uh-huh.
and responsible government.
For sure.
Well said.
Yeah.
Well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive
Yeah.
into this fascinating case. in St. Johns County.
Right.
Remember, this isn't just some local issue.
Right.
What happens with this vote
Yeah.
could impact law enforcement.
No, definitely.
All over Florida and beyond.
It shows how these local events can connect to bigger questions.
Absolutely.
About government accountability, the role of unions in society.
So keep asking those tough questions. Everyone, stay informed, and let's keep this conversation going. Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.